Do not stop for a stranger in the snow. They warned her all her life. Because sometimes the person you save is the one who changes your destiny forever. Emma Whitmore had heard those words many times before, but she never believed kindness could be something dangerous. She was an Omega who lived quietly near the frozen borders of Silvermoon Kingdom, far away from the golden halls of the royal palace. While others measured worth through power, status, and family names, Emma measured it through the lives she could help. Every morning, she walked through the small forest paths carrying her herb satchel, searching for plants that could heal the villagers who had nowhere else to turn. She was not famous. She was not powerful. Many people believed an Omega like her would always remain unnoticed. But Emma had learned that being overlooked did not mean being without value. On the coldest night of winter, when snow covered the forest for miles and the wind moved through the trees like a distant whisper, Emma heard something that did not belong. It was not the sound of the storm. It was softer, weaker, a quiet cry hidden beneath the endless white landscape. She followed the sound through the snow-covered trees, her heart telling her to continue even when the cold made every step difficult. Beneath a large pine tree, she discovered a small baby wrapped carefully in a worn blanket. The child was alone, surrounded by the silence of the winter forest. Emma immediately forgot about the cold, the darkness, and her own fear. She carefully lifted the baby and held the child close, using her own cloak to provide warmth. "You are not alone anymore," she whispered gently. "I am here." She did not know who the child was. She did not know that powerful figures across Silvermoon Kingdom were searching for this missing child. She only saw someone who needed help. Far away in the royal palace, King Alexander Hayes stood before his advisors as news arrived from the Northern Territory. The Alpha King was known throughout the kingdom for his strength, discipline, and ability to carry the weight of responsibility. Yet behind the crown and the expectations was a man who had spent years believing that duty came before everything else. When the message about the lost child reached him, he immediately prepared to search for answers. The child was connected to a secret that could change the future of Silvermoon Kingdom. But no one expected the answer would lead to a quiet Omega living near the forest. As the night continued, Emma sat beside a small fire in her cottage, watching the baby rest peacefully. She had no idea that this simple act of compassion had already set something ancient into motion. At that exact moment, deep within the royal palace, a mysterious mark that had remained silent for years began to awaken. A connection believed to exist only in old legends had finally appeared. The Alpha King did not know who had awakened it. Emma did not know why fate had brought the child to her. But beneath the falling snow, two lives that were never supposed to meet had already begun moving toward the same destiny. The morning after the winter storm arrived quietly over Frostvale Village, covering the small cottages and forest paths with a peaceful blanket of snow. Emma Whitmore woke before sunrise, as she always did, and checked on the baby resting near the warmth of the fireplace. She had spent the entire night caring for the child, using every healing skill she knew. She still did not know where the baby came from or why fate had placed them in her path, but one thing was certain. She could not leave someone helpless behind. Outside her cottage, the village slowly began to wake. When neighbors discovered that Emma had found a child in the forest, they were surprised. Some admired her kindness, while others questioned why an Omega would involve herself in something connected to the royal family. Emma listened quietly, but never regretted her choice. "A person in need does not become less important because of where they come from," she said gently. Those words reflected everything about her. Emma had spent her entire life being told that Omegas should remain in the background. She had learned to accept being underestimated, but she never allowed those opinions to decide who she was. Meanwhile, inside Silvermoon Palace, King Alexander Hayes studied the reports brought by his royal guards and advisors. The missing child had been found, but the mystery surrounding the discovery only grew deeper. The child had appeared in the northern forest during the harshest winter night, with no clear explanation of how they arrived there. Alexander looked over the information carefully, searching for answers. He was not only the Alpha King, he was also responsible for protecting the future of his kingdom. Yet something about the situation felt different. There was a strange pull he could not explain, a feeling that the answer was connected to something beyond ordinary understanding. When Alexander entered the ancient chamber where royal records were kept, he discovered something unexpected. The old writings spoke of a forgotten bond, one that would awaken only when someone with a truly compassionate heart protected a life without expecting anything in return. For years, many believed the legend was only a story. Alexander had never given it much thought. But now, the mark that had remained silent for so long carried a warmth unlike anything he had experienced before. His advisors noticed the change and exchanged uncertain looks. They knew the meaning of that mark. It was not simply a symbol of power. It represented a connection that could influence the entire kingdom. Far away from the palace, Emma sat beside the baby and watched the snow fall outside her window. She gently held the child's small hand and wondered what kind of future waited ahead. She did not know that the royal family was searching for her. She did not know that the Alpha King himself was preparing to travel toward the forest. She only knew that someone needed her help, and she would continue protecting the child for as long as necessary. As the sun rose higher, two paths slowly moved closer together. One belonged to a King Alpha carrying the weight of a kingdom. The other belonged to an Omega who had nothing but kindness to offer. Neither of them knew that their meeting would challenge old beliefs, reveal hidden truths, and change the destiny of Silvermoon forever. The journey from Silvermoon Palace to Frostvale Village took King Alexander. Hazed through miles of frozen wilderness, but the cold was not what occupied his thoughts. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King found himself searching for someone whose identity was unknown, guided only by a mysterious connection and an ancient legend he once believed was nothing more than a forgotten tale. As his carriage approached the quiet village near the forest, Alexander looked toward the snow-covered trees and wondered who could have awakened a bond that had remained silent for so long. Inside her small cottage, Emma Whitmore was unaware that the most powerful werewolf in the kingdom was getting closer. She spent the morning preparing a simple meal and caring for the baby she had found beneath the pine trees. The child had become comfortable around her, often reaching toward her whenever she entered the room. Emma smiled softly, grateful that the little one seemed to feel safe. She still did not know why fate had brought them together, but she believed every life had a purpose. When Alexander finally arrived in Frostvale Village, the entire community gathered outside, surprised by the presence of their King Alpha. Many expected him to immediately demand answers, but Alexander did something unexpected. He asked where the child was. The villagers pointed toward Emma's cottage, and for a brief moment, the Alpha King stood silently at the door. He had imagined meeting someone connected to the ancient bond would feel dramatic or overwhelming. Instead, he found a young Omega sitting beside a warm fireplace, gently comforting a child who was not even her own. Emma looked up as Alexander entered. She recognized him immediately, not because of his title, but because of the way the entire room seemed to change when he arrived. Still, she did not bow in fear or try to impress him. She simply stood and said, "The child is resting. The journey here must have been difficult for you." Alexander was surprised by her words. Most people focused on his position before anything else. Emma focused on whether he was tired. "You know who I am?" he asked. Emma nodded. "The village knew you were coming." Alexander studied her carefully. There was no ambition in her expression, no attempt to gain favor, only genuine concern. Then the child reached toward Emma, and at that exact moment, Alexander felt the ancient mark on his skin awaken with a gentle warmth. The room became quiet. Emma noticed his reaction but did not understand what had happened. Alexander looked at her with a mixture of confusion and recognition. The legend had never described a person chosen because of wealth, influence, or status. It spoke of someone whose heart would reveal the truth. For years, Alexander had believed destiny would arrive through strength and power. Yet standing in a small cottage with an Omega who had saved a child without expecting anything in return, he began to question everything he knew. Outside, the snow continued falling over Frostvale Village. Inside, two lives that had existed in completely different worlds finally stood face to face. Neither Emma nor Alexander understood the full meaning of that moment, but both could feel that something unseen had already begun connecting their futures together. The news of the Alpha King's arrival in Frostvale Village spread quickly, but the quiet cottage at the edge of the forest remained peaceful. Emma Whitmore had never expected her simple act of kindness to bring the most powerful figure in Silvermoon Kingdom to her doorstep. Yet as she stood across from King Alexander Hayes, she felt something unusual. Not fear, not pressure, something she could not explain. Alexander had spent his entire life surrounded by people who treated him differently because of his title. They saw the crown before they saw the person. But Emma looked at him with the same gentle honesty she offered everyone else. That was what surprised him most. The next morning, Alexander remained in Frostvale Village to learn more about what happened. He wanted answers about the child, but he also wanted to understand the Omega who had unknowingly awakened an ancient connection. Emma explained everything she remembered about the night she found the baby. She described the sound beneath the snow, the small blanket, and the moment she decided she could not walk away. She never mentioned destiny. She never mentioned the strange mark that had appeared between them. She simply talked about helping someone who needed her. Alexander listened carefully. For years, he had been surrounded by advisors who spoke about strategies, alliances, and power. Emma spoke about compassion, responsibility, and the value of every life. Her words felt unfamiliar, yet somehow they made sense. When they returned to the palace, the arrival of Emma and the child created immediate discussion among the royal council. Many were surprised that the Alpha King had brought an unknown Omega from a distant village into the center of royal attention. Some questioned whether she truly belonged near the throne. Emma heard their doubts, but remained calm. She had spent her life being underestimated. She knew that trying to convince everyone would only distract from what mattered most. The child needed care, and that was her priority. During the council meeting, one elder asked Alexander why he trusted someone without a royal background. The room became silent as everyone waited for his answer. Alexander looked toward Emma before speaking. Because when everyone else saw a mystery, she saw someone who needed help. Those simple words changed the atmosphere in the chamber. Emma did not expect him to defend her. She had never asked for protection or recognition. But Alexander understood something important. The person standing beside him was not seeking power. She had already proven her worth through her actions. Later that evening, Emma walked through the palace gardens for the first time. The massive stone pathways, ancient trees, and beautiful fountains felt completely different from her small forest home. Yet she noticed something familiar. The flowers near the healing garden were struggling, just like many plants she had cared for before. Without hesitation, she began examining them. Alexander watched quietly as she focused on the garden instead of the luxury surrounding her. You are standing inside the royal gardens, and the first thing you notice is a plant that needs help, he said with a small smile. Emma looked back at him. A living thing does not stop needing care just because it is surrounded by beauty. Those words stayed with Alexander long after the evening ended. He had spent years searching for someone who could stand beside the Alpha King. But perhaps fate had not sent him someone who wanted the crown. Perhaps it had sent him someone who reminded him what the crown was meant to protect. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to Silvermoon Palace. For Emma Whitmore, every corner of the royal home felt unfamiliar, yet she never allowed the size of the palace to change who she was. While many visitors admired the golden halls, the towering towers, and the ancient symbols of the Alpha King's bloodline, Emma noticed the smaller things. She noticed the tired gardeners who needed help carrying supplies. She noticed the empty spaces in the healing gardens where new plants could grow. She noticed the quiet moments when palace workers needed someone willing to listen. King Alexander Hayes watched these details with curiosity. He had welcomed many important figures into the palace throughout his reign, but none had entered with such a simple purpose. Emma was not interested in influence, attention, or a place beside the throne. She was interested in helping. The child she had found in the snow continued to recover peacefully under her care, and the bond between them grew stronger each day. The palace healers were amazed by how naturally the baby responded to Emma's presence. Yet Emma never considered it unusual. To her, kindness was not a special ability. It was simply something everyone could choose. One afternoon, Alexander invited Emma to walk through the royal archives. He wanted to show her the ancient records connected to the mysterious mark. The grand library was filled with thousands of books, carefully preserved for generations. Emma moved slowly between the shelves, fascinated by the history surrounding her. Alexander stopped beside an old collection of writings. For centuries, people believed the Alpha mark appeared only through power and royal blood, he explained. But the oldest records tell a different story. Emma looked at the pages carefully. What do they say? Alexander hesitated before answering. They say the mark responds to a heart that chooses compassion when there is nothing to gain. Emma lowered her eyes, thinking about the night she found the child. She had not rescued the baby because of a prophecy. She had not known about the mark. She had simply done what felt right. That was exactly why Alexander found himself drawn to her. She reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. A kingdom was not built only through laws and strength. It was built through the choices people made when nobody was watching. However, the growing connection between the Alpha King and the Omega did not go unnoticed. Some members of the royal council remained uncertain. They believed old traditions should decide the future, not an unexpected bond created by fate. During a formal gathering, one advisor questioned whether Emma's presence would create confusion among the people. Emma listened without anger. She understood that change was difficult for those who had spent their lives following one path. When Alexander looked toward her, expecting her response, she simply said, "People fear what they do not understand." The best answer is not an argument. It is showing them something better. Her calm words surprised the council. She did not seek approval. She did not demand acceptance. She trusted that actions would speak louder than opinions. Later that evening, Alexander walked through the gardens with Emma beneath the soft light of the moon. The palace no longer felt as distant as it once had. For the first time in years, the Alpha King felt that someone was standing beside him because of who he truly was, not because of the crown he carried. "You changed this place without trying to change anything," Alexander said quietly. Emma smiled. Sometimes people only need someone to remind them what they already have. As the child slept peacefully within the palace walls, the ancient bond between the Omega and the Alpha King continued to grow. Neither of them fully understood what destiny had planned, but both knew one truth. The moment Emma chose kindness in the snow had already begun changing the future of Silvermoon Kingdom. The quiet changes within Silvermoon Palace continued to grow, even though many people still did not understand what was happening. Emma Whitmore never arrived seeking a place in history. She never dreamed of becoming someone the kingdom would notice. Yet every day, her choices created small moments that slowly changed the hearts of those around her. The palace gardeners began asking for her advice. The healers started sharing their knowledge with her. Even servants who once kept their distance began greeting her with warmth. Emma treated every person the same, whether they wore royal clothing or simple village garments. King Alexander Hayes noticed this more than anyone. He had spent years surrounded by people who measured every action through power and influence. Emma measured everything through kindness. One morning, Alexander found her in the healing gardens, carefully examining the plants near the eastern pathway. The flowers there had struggled for years because the soil had lost its strength. While others considered the area useless, Emma saw a chance for renewal. "You always look for what can be saved," Alexander said as he approached. Emma smiled, while touching a small green leaf growing near the ground. Because something being forgotten does not mean it has no value. Alexander remained silent for a moment. Her words reminded him of more than the garden. They reminded him of the way many people viewed Omegas throughout the kingdom. For generations, some had believed strength came only from those with authority. Emma quietly showed him that strength could also come from patience, understanding, and the courage to care. Meanwhile, the royal council continued studying the ancient mark that connected Alexander and Emma. The elders searched through old records, hoping to understand why the legendary bond had appeared after so many years. Their discoveries revealed something unexpected. The mark was never meant to choose the most powerful person. It appeared when the right person made a choice without expecting anything in return. Alexander thought about the night Emma found the child in the snow. She had no idea who the baby was. She had no idea that helping someone would change her entire future. She simply saw a life that needed protection. That realization stayed with him. One afternoon, Alexander invited Emma to join a meeting with the kingdom's healers. Some were nervous at first because they had never worked closely with an Omega in such an important role. But Emma did not try to prove herself through status or authority. She listened to their experiences and offered ideas with respect. By the end of the meeting, the healers understood why Alexander trusted her. She did not lead by demanding attention. She led by making others feel valued. Later that evening, Alexander and Emma stood beside the palace balcony overlooking Silvermoon Kingdom. Thousands of lights illuminated the villages below, creating a peaceful view across the land. When I first became King Alpha, I believed my duty was to carry every burden alone, Alexander said quietly. Emma looked at him with understanding. A leader protects others, but that does not mean they must stand alone. Those words reached him deeper than any royal advice he had ever received. For the first time, Alexander realized the bond between them was not simply a legend written in ancient records. It was a reminder that even the strongest person could need someone who saw the heart behind the title. And as the child who started this journey continued to grow stronger, the kingdom slowly began to understand that the greatest changes often begin with the smallest acts of kindness. The first signs of spring arrived in Silvermoon Kingdom, bringing warmer days and a new sense of hope throughout the land. The snow that once covered the northern forests began to disappear, revealing fresh streams, green fields, and flowers that had been waiting beneath the frozen ground. For Emma Whitmore, the changing season felt like a reminder of everything that had transformed since the night she found the child beneath the snow. She was still the same Omega who walked quietly through forest paths with a simple herb satchel, but the kingdom now saw her differently. People who once ignored her advice now traveled from distant villages to learn from her knowledge. Yet Emma never allowed admiration to change her heart. She continued helping others because kindness had always been her choice, long before anyone knew her name. King Alexander Hayes watched these changes with quiet pride. He noticed that Silvermoon was becoming a different kingdom, not because of new laws or greater power, but because people were beginning to see each other differently. The Alpha King, who once believed leadership meant carrying every responsibility alone, had learned that a kingdom became stronger when everyone had a voice. However, not everyone accepted the changes easily. A group of traditional leaders from the outer territories arrived at Silvermoon Palace with concerns about Emma's growing influence. They respected the King Alpha, but they struggled to understand why an Omega with no royal background had become such an important figure in the kingdom. During the council gathering, Emma stood beside Alexander as the elders shared their doubts. They questioned whether someone like her could truly understand the responsibilities connected to the royal family. Emma listened carefully without anger or disappointment. She had faced doubt before. She knew that words alone would not change every opinion. When it was her turn to speak, she looked around the chamber and calmly said, "I understand why some people are uncertain. Change can feel unfamiliar. But the purpose of helping others has never been about where someone comes from. It has always been about what they choose to do." The room became quiet. Alexander watched the elders carefully. He knew Emma was not trying to defeat their opinions. She was simply sharing the truth she had lived by her entire life. Later, one of the elder leaders visited the healing gardens and saw something unexpected. He saw children from different territories learning together. He saw healers sharing knowledge instead of protecting it. He saw villagers who once felt forgotten being welcomed into a place that belonged to everyone. Slowly, he began to understand what Alexander had seen from the beginning. Emma had never asked for power. She had created trust. That evening, Alexander and Emma walked through the gardens beneath the fading sunlight. The flowers she had helped restore were now blooming across the palace grounds. "You changed their minds without trying to convince them," Alexander said. Emma smiled softly. "People rarely change because they are forced to. They change when they experience something different." Alexander looked across the kingdom beyond the palace walls. He realized the bond between them had become more than an ancient mark or a forgotten legend. It had become a symbol of a new future. A future where strength was not measured by who stood above others, but by who was willing to stand beside them. And as the child who brought Emma and Alexander together continued to grow, Silvermoon Kingdom slowly discovered that the greatest destiny was not written in old stories. It was created through the choices people made every single day. The bond between Emma Whitmore and King Alexander Hayes continued to change Silvermoon Kingdom in ways neither of them had expected. Months had passed since the night beneath the snow, yet the memory remained clear in everyone's mind. A simple act of kindness had brought together an Omega who had never sought attention and an Alpha King who had spent his life carrying responsibility alone. Now, their connection had become a symbol of hope throughout the kingdom. The child Emma discovered in the forest had grown stronger with each passing season. The little one was surrounded by care, warmth, and the protection of an entire kingdom. Emma continued to spend time teaching healers and helping communities, while Alexander worked to create a future where every person, regardless of their status, could contribute their gifts. But as Silver Moon entered a new era, Alexander knew one final challenge remained. The old traditions that had shaped the kingdom for generations could not disappear overnight. Many people accepted change because they saw its results, but others still believed the future should follow the same path as the past. During a grand gathering at the royal hall, leaders from every territory arrived to discuss the future of Silver Moon. The room was filled with voices from different backgrounds, each carrying their own beliefs and experiences. Emma stood beside Alexander, not as someone standing behind the throne, but as someone whose wisdom had earned a place beside him. One elder stepped forward and asked a question that many had silently wondered. If the bond between you was never revealed, would this Omega still have a place in the future of this kingdom? The hall became quiet. Alexander looked toward Emma, but he did not answer for her. He trusted her voice. Emma took a moment before speaking. A person's value should never depend on whether destiny notices them. Every life has meaning before any mark appears. Her words traveled through the chamber. She was not rejecting the bond. She was reminding everyone that the bond was powerful because of who she already was, not because it gave her importance. Alexander felt a deep respect for her in that moment. The ancient mark had revealed a connection between them, but Emma had shown him something greater. A person did not become valuable because they were chosen. They were chosen because of the value they already carried. After the gathering, many leaders began reconsidering the beliefs they had followed for years. They saw that Emma had never tried to replace tradition. She had helped the kingdom remember the purpose behind it. That evening, Alexander and Emma walked through the royal gardens where their journey had continued after the snowy night. The flowers were brighter than ever, and the healing gardens had become a place where everyone felt welcome. When I first found you, I thought destiny was something written for us before we were born, Alexander said quietly. Emma looked at him with a gentle smile. Maybe destiny gives us a path, but our choices decide where it leads. Alexander looked across the kingdom lights in the distance. He knew Silver Moon was no longer the kingdom it had been before. It was a place where compassion had become a strength and where people were learning that different voices could create a better future. As the child who brought them together looked toward the stars from the palace window, a new chapter quietly began. The Alpha King and the Omega who saved a life in the snow had discovered that the greatest bonds were not created by power or position. They were created by the courage to choose kindness when the world expected something else. Years passed quietly in Silver Moon Kingdom, and the story that began beneath a winter storm became a memory that people would share for generations. The child Emma Whitmore discovered in the snow was no longer a mystery hidden from the world. The little one who brought an unexpected connection between an Omega and the Alpha King had grown surrounded by love, guidance, and the care of an entire kingdom. What started as a moment of compassion had become a reminder that one choice could change countless lives. Emma still walked through the healing gardens every morning, just as she had when she first arrived at the palace. She continued carrying her simple herb satchel, speaking with healers, helping villagers, and teaching younger generations the importance of patience and kindness. Even after becoming one of the most respected people in Silver Moon, she never forgot the quiet Omega who once lived near the forest and believed every life deserved care. King Alexander Hayes had changed as well. He remained the powerful Alpha King who protected the kingdom, but his leadership was no longer defined only by authority. He listened more. He trusted more. He understood that a ruler did not become stronger by standing above others, but by creating a place where everyone could stand together. On the anniversary of the night they found the child, Alexander and Emma returned to the forest where their journey began. The snow had long disappeared, replaced by green fields and wildflowers surrounding the peaceful stream. Emma looked across the trees and smiled. "It feels strange that everything started here," she said softly. Alexander looked at the place where their lives had changed forever. "You were searching for nothing that night except someone who needed help." Emma nodded. "And I found a reason to believe that small choices can matter." Alexander smiled because he knew she still did not realize how much her actions had changed the world around her. She never saved the child because she wanted recognition. She never cared for others because she expected a reward. She simply chose kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. That was the reason the ancient bond had awakened. Not because she was an Omega, not because destiny had written her name, but because her heart revealed the kind of strength that could transform a kingdom. As they returned to Silvermoon Palace, they passed through villages filled with people who once believed old traditions could never change. Now, those same communities celebrated cooperation, understanding, and the belief that every person had something valuable to offer. The mark that connected the Alpha King and the Omega remained a symbol of their bond, but the people of Silvermoon understood its true meaning. It was never about power choosing someone above others. It was about two people choosing each other through trust, respect, and compassion. That evening, Emma stood beside Alexander overlooking the lights of the kingdom. The same Alpha King who once carried every burden alone now stood beside the Omega, who taught him that strength could be gentle. The same Omega who was once unnoticed became the heart of a kingdom that learned to see beyond appearances. Their story was never only about destiny. It was about a choice made on a snowy night, when one person saw someone in need and decided to care. And from that single act of kindness, a new future was born in Silvermoon Kingdom, where the greatest power was not found in a crown, a title, or a mark, but in the hearts of those who chose compassion.